I'm Rebecca, and if there's one thing you should know about me before we go any further, it's this. I've learned to keep my face still when everything inside me is breaking. That morning, sitting across from my parents and my sister at the lawyer's table, I wore my best expressionless expression. It wasn't courage. It was muscle memory. The room was polished, sterile, probably meant to feel neutral. It didn't. My mother sat prim and composed in a navy suit, fingers laced over her designer purse. My father leaned back like he was waiting for a meeting to end, and Emma, my older sister, looked like someone who already knew she'd won. When the lawyer handed her the envelope, she smiled without even opening it. A check for $10 million. My parents didn't flinch. My mom even reached over to pat her hand. My dad turned to me after that and said it so casually like it was a favor. Go earn your own, Rebecca. I didn't speak. I didn't blink. I stared at the mahogany grain on the table, counting the ridges in the wood, because it was better than thinking about how hollow I suddenly felt. I didn't cry. I wasn't surprised. That's what made it worse. They had already erased me. This was just the formal announcement, and then the energy in the room shifted. Just slightly. Enough to cut through the fog. A voice spoke from behind us. Older, calm, deliberate. There's one more document. Everyone turned. The man was maybe in his late 60s, dressed in gray, with an envelope in his hand. A worn, creased thing that didn't match the polished folders or the clean white pages in front of us. My mother's hand stiffened on her purse. My father sat up straighter. Emma narrowed her eyes. He said it belonged to Walter Whitman, my grandfather. My heart didn't race, not yet. It was too guarded for that. But something in me leaned forward. I hadn't heard his name spoken aloud by this family in months. Not since the funeral I apparently never showed up for. Not since the calls I'd supposedly never returned. Not since they told me more than once that I had moved on. The lawyer accepted the envelope and glanced at me before he opened it. That look, measured, not unkind, but curious, was the first sign that maybe this wasn't over. Maybe someone had noticed what they tried so hard to bury. He cleared his throat. It seems Mr. Whitman left instructions to be followed separately under specific conditions, that this letter be presented today with all parties present. My mother began to protest. Something about legal processing. My father added that the estate had already been divided, but the gray-suited man simply said this was written by hand in Mr. Whitman's final days. He made it very clear. Emma shifted uncomfortably. For the first time that morning, she didn't look certain. I sat there silent, letting them squirm. Not because I wanted revenge. I just needed to see it. To feel what it was like when truth entered a room full of people who thought they'd buried it for good. Because here's the thing. I used to believe I had to earn their love. If I worked hard enough, stayed small enough, never asked for more than they were willing to give, I'd finally be seen. But at that moment, with that envelope in the lawyer's hand and the dread rising behind my mother's careful smile, I understood something else. Maybe I wasn't the one who disappeared. Maybe I was just erased, and someone somewhere had finally decided to write me back in. The drive to my grandfather's ranch was longer than I remembered, or maybe it just felt that way because I was older and heavier in ways that had nothing to do with luggage. The gravel road curled through the same tired trees and cracked fences I'd known since childhood, but nothing felt welcoming. Not the faded mailbox with the crooked Whitman plaque, not the chipped paint on the front porch, and definitely not the silence that met me when I stepped out of the car. The wind chimes still hung above the door, but their sound was hollow now, more like a warning than welcome. I hesitated, hand raised to knock, staring at the white door I used to run through every summer like it was home base in a game only kids understand. But I wasn't a kid anymore, and this wasn't the same house. When the door finally opened, I wasn't sure what to expect. My grandmother stood there, arms crossed, mouth set in a tight line that hadn't softened with age. She looked at me like I was late to something important, not like someone she hadn't seen in nearly 2 years. So you decided to show up. Her voice hadn't changed. It still had the sharpness that could cut you if you weren't ready. I said her name, unsure of what I was even asking for. She didn't answer it. Instead, she stepped aside and let me in the gesture, stiff and begrudging. Inside, everything was the same. The floral wallpaper, the ticking clock over the fireplace, and the faint smell of coffee and dust. But it felt wrong. The air was too still, like the house had been waiting for an explanation that never came. She turned to me suddenly, eyes narrowed. They told me you didn't want to be bothered, that you were too busy, that you'd moved on. I tried to respond, but my throat tightened. I told her I had stopped by in March, that no one had answered, and that Emma said nobody was home. She didn't blink. We were here, every day. Then she disappeared into the hallway and came back with a notepad in her hand. My grandfather's handwriting was on it, neat and blocky. He called this number every day, she said. I looked down. It wasn't mine, not even close. They told us you changed it, that you didn't want to be found. My knees gave a little. That's not true. I've had the same number since college. Her expression cracked for a moment. They lied to me. She sank slowly into the chair by the window. They lied to him too. He died thinking you didn't care. I whispered that I never even knew he was sick. She looked up, eyes suddenly old in a different way. They told us you didn't come to the funeral. But I did. I got to the church. It was empty. It was at 9, she said. They told you noon. They wanted you to miss it. The air in the room shifted. My chest tightened. I stood there silent, letting it all crash into me. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was sabotage, and they made sure I'd never know until it was too late. My grandmother didn't say anything for a while after she sat down. She just stared at the notepad in her lap like it might rearrange itself into something less cruel. I didn't press her. The silence between us wasn't empty. It was thick with realization, and for the first time I could feel her grief separate from her anger. Eventually she stood up again and walked to a drawer near the fireplace. From it she pulled out a leather-bound journal, the kind my grandfather always carried. She placed it in my hands without a word. The moment I opened it, I knew. His handwriting, his notes, his little sketches in the margins. My name was on almost every other page. There were logs of experiments I had shared with him years ago, notes from articles I'd mailed him, ideas he had jotted down and labeled for Rebecca. He'd been keeping track of everything long after I thought he had forgotten me. I could barely breathe. All this time he had been trying to stay close. All this time they had just made sure I never knew. My grandmother sat across from me and rubbed her temples like she was waking up from a long, aching sleep. I think it's time, she said. Time for them to see what they tried to bury. She stood and walked to the old rotary phone in the kitchen, her fingers slow but steady as she dialed. She called my mother first, then my father, then Emma. Her voice was calm but firm. You need to be here. 1 hour. No excuses. I could hear the protests even through the receiver, but she didn't waver. It wasn't a request. It was a reckoning. When she hung up, she turned to me and said, "The lawyer's coming too. Your grandfather left specific instructions." I blinked. "The lawyer?" She nodded. "He wanted everything read aloud, but only if we were all together. He made me promise. So that's what we're going to do." The next hour passed like slow thunder. I sat at the kitchen table, tracing the edge with my fingertips, remembering how I used to sit there during summers, legs swinging beneath the bench, listening to Grandpa explain how plants respond to music. The air in the house had shifted. It wasn't hostile anymore. It was waiting. Outside, I heard a car door slam. Then another. Voices. My mother's chirpy tone. My father measured quietly. Emma sighed, bored and irritated. They had no idea I was here, no clue what was coming. My grandmother placed her hand gently on my shoulder and whispered, "Stay here. I'll call you when it's time." I nodded, my chest tight, heart steady. For the first time in years, I wasn't the outsider looking in. I was the one they had to face. When my grandmother called my name, the room fell quiet. I stepped into the doorway, and it felt like the air had changed temperature. 3 heads turned at once, and for a second no one breathed. My mother's smile froze halfway like it had been painted on, and suddenly cracked. My father's jaw clenched the way it always did when things slipped out of his control. And Emma. She looked like someone had stolen the script to her perfect play. No one spoke. I didn't either. I walked in slowly, taking the empty chair across from them without breaking eye contact. My grandmother sat beside me. Her expression gave away nothing. She didn't need to say a word. Her presence said enough. The lawyer, Mr. Gaines, cleared his throat. He was an older man with white hair, trimmed neatly, glasses slipping down his nose. He opened a leather folder, placed it gently on the table, and said, "This is the final will and testament of Walter James Whitman, prepared and sealed under explicit instructions." My mother straightened up, suddenly attentive. My father shifted in his seat, trying to regain composure. Emma crossed her arms and rolled her eyes. I stayed quiet, hands folded in my lap, heart pounding but face unreadable. This wasn't revenge. This was witnessing. To my wife, Margaret Whitman, he began, "I leave our home the land it rests on and funds for her care. She knows where the rest is kept." My grandmother didn't move. She had already heard it before. She had lived with it. Then he turned the page. To my granddaughter, Rebecca Whitman. The pause after my name was intentional. I felt it echo through the floorboards. I leave the Whitman Research Annex located on Laurel Ridge, including all laboratory equipment accounts and intellectual property currently under Whitman Innovation. Emma made a sound something between a scoff and a choke. My mother looked down. My father didn't move. And finally, Mr. Gaines continued, "The remainder of the estate, including stocks and retirement funds, shall be split evenly between my granddaughters, Rebecca and Emma Whitman." Emma stood up so fast her chair scraped loudly against the wood. Her voice was sharp. "He gave her the annex. The entire facility, that wasn't the plan. You said if I just kept showing up, if I stayed close, if I smiled, it would all be mine." She pointed at our parents, her hands shaking. They didn't answer. My father's fingers tapped his knee. My mother looked like she might cry or scream or both. Mr. Gaines raised a hand, calm but firm. "There's more," he said. "Mr. Whitman left a personal letter for Rebecca. He requested that it be read aloud in this room." Emma laughed bitterly, but no one joined her. The silence was too heavy, too sharp. My grandmother reached into the drawer beside her and pulled out the letter. Folded neatly, aged but intact. I didn't reach for it. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. This wasn't about claiming victory. It was about being seen finally in the light they had tried so hard to dim. My grandfather's voice was about to fill the room, and I was ready. Mr. Gaines unfolded the letter slowly, careful with the creases, like he understood that what was inside mattered more than paper. The room was silent except for the faint hum of the old fridge and the ticking of the mantel clock. He cleared his throat and began to read. "To my dearest Rebecca, if this is being read, then I'm gone. But if you're hearing it, then you're here. And that matters more to me than you'll ever know." I felt the first tear well before I could stop it. I didn't blink. I didn't want to miss a word. I wanted them all to hear every syllable like I was hearing it for the first time. "You were always the quiet one, the one who noticed things others didn't, the one who asked questions that made people uncomfortable. You were never the loudest, but you were always the most awake." Emma sank back into her chair. My mother's jaw tightened. My father stared at the wall like it would answer something. "You built a truth no one bothered to ask about. And when they couldn't understand you, they decided to silence you instead. But I saw you. I always did." I gripped the arms of my chair, not to hold myself up, but to keep from breaking. His words weren't just validation. They were rescued. They were what I had waited my whole life to hear. "I remember when you brought me that notebook at age 7, the one with raindrop calculations and questions about bees. I knew then you had a mind that would bloom if only someone remembered to water it. The air around us got heavier. Not suffocating, just real." My family shifted, uncomfortable, but I didn't move. I wanted every second of it. You weren't invisible to me. You were brilliant. And when others dimmed your light, you never stopped burning. You just burned quietly. A sob escaped before I could swallow it, not from pain, from something deeper, from being seen after years of being erased. I wish I could have done more. I wish I had shouted for you when they stayed silent, but I hope this gift is a start. A place that doesn't ask you to shrink. A place where your voice writes the rules. Emma wiped her eye quickly and was annoyed. My mother blinked fast, her lips a thin line. My father didn't look away, but he didn't look at me either. You wrote your own role, Rebecca, and I could not be prouder. Mr. Gaines stopped reading. He folded the letter with care and placed it on the table. No one moved. No one spoke. I exhaled slowly, and the tears came then warm and quiet. I didn't hide them. They weren't ashamed. They were released. I had spent years trying to earn a seat at a table that was never meant for me. And now with my grandfather's words still echoing in the room, I realized something simple and life-altering. I had always belonged. They just hadn't seen it. But he had. And now, finally, so had I. The annex didn't feel like a lab at first. It felt like a place someone built with love and stubborn belief. Sunlight poured through the glass walls in the morning, hitting every shelf and bench, like it was meant to wake the space from sleep. I spent the first few weeks just breathing it in, organizing equipment, dusting forgotten corners, and finding notes my grandfather had tucked into drawers with my name on them. It wasn't just a building. It was a message that someone had known I'd need a place like this someday. I started the Little Scientist program almost by accident. A local principal asked if I could bring in some materials for a science week. I brought a microscope and a soil testing kit, thinking it would be a one-off thing. But the way those kids looked at the samples, the way their eyes widened when they saw mold cells or water microbes, it reminded me of 7-year-old me. One girl stood out from the beginning, Mia, 11, maybe 12. She was quiet in the way I used to be, always hanging back notebook, half-closed hair covering her face. But she was watching everything, and when she finally showed me what she'd been sketching, my breath caught. Her diagrams weren't neat, but they were brilliant. Pollination charts, notes on bee behavior, observations she had made on her own time outside class. When I told her she had a scientist's eye, she blinked at me like I had just said something impossible. Then she whispered, "You actually read it?" I smiled and told her I did. And not only that, I understood it. The look on her face was something I'll never forget. Like someone had just handed her a key to a door she didn't know existed. I gave her a leather-bound notebook just like mine. Inside the cover, I wrote the same line my grandfather once gave me. Write the things they don't understand. One day, the world will. Watching Mia reminded me that this legacy wasn't just about my healing. It was about creating something bigger than one person's pain. Something that could grow in new soil through new minds and bloom in ways I never imagined. She showed up on a Thursday afternoon unannounced. I saw her through the front glass standing just inside the main entrance with her hands tucked into the sleeves of a navy coat that looked one size too big. No makeup, no heels, no expression I could name. I walked out to greet her, unsure of what I was even expecting. She looked up at me, not defensive, not apologetic, just still. Then she said, "I'd like to see it. The lab. What you've done here." I nodded and let her in. We walked the halls slowly. I pointed things out quietly, but she didn't say much. Just listened. She paused longest at the student wall where photos from the Little Scientist program were pinned in rows of colorful faces and messy handwriting. She asked questions soft and curious. How we got funding, whether the kids got to keep their notebooks. What was the device on the far bench used for? It felt less like a tour and more like a truce neither of us had words for. When we reached the community garden, she stopped. Families were out harvesting. A mother with 2 kids laughed near the compost bins. A boy tested soil pH with one of our field kits. Emma stood next to me and said, "I don't expect you to forgive me." I stayed quiet. She nodded like she'd expected that. Then she added, "I just wanted to see what he built for you, and what you built from it." She didn't cry, but her hands never stopped moving, pulling at her sleeves, adjusting the strap of her bag. I didn't give a speech. I just let her stay. That summer, she came back again, then again. By the third visit, she was helping the kids with presentations, standing behind them when they got nervous, and teaching them how to speak with confidence. They started calling her Coach V. She never said sorry, not directly, but every time she showed up early or stayed late or handed a notebook back with a quiet compliment written in the margin, I saw pieces of her I had never known. Not the sister I'd competed with, not the one who watched me fade. But someone was trying in the only way she knew how to begin again. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't wrapped in redemption, but it was real. And for the first time in a long time, that was enough. It's been 6 years since the letter, since that afternoon in my grandmother's living room when the past broke open and let the truth walk in. The world didn't change overnight, but something inside me did. The annex has grown. What started as one building with second-hand equipment and sunlit windows is now a full research campus. We have 4 labs, 3 greenhouses, and 60 acres of trial fields. Teams from universities in Kenya and Brazil collaborate with us on soil restoration. Our drought-resistant crops feed thousands in rural parts of the South. I don't speak to my parents anymore. Not because of anger, but because there's nothing left to say. Their names still show up sometimes in press releases from Florida or in emails I don't open. They retired early just like they planned. I hope they found whatever peace they were chasing. Emma and I don't talk often either. Twice a year she volunteers with the youth science program. The kids love her. Some still call her Coach V. I watch her sometimes from across the room, showing a shy kid how to project their voice, adjusting a slide deck. She never looks for me. She just does the work. That's how I know it's real. My grandmother lives in a small apartment connected to the house I built near the annex. She's slower now. Her memory sometimes stumbles, but every morning we drink coffee together in the sunroom, and she tells me things I never knew about my grandfather. He once planted a tree just to propose. How he believed soil could remember kindness. He always said I'd come back. I think he was right. Maybe I had to leave to understand what returning meant. Some nights after the lights are off and the campus has gone quiet, I walk to the old bench at the edge of the field. It's the same one he built by hand. From there, I can see the stars clearly, not the plastic kind I used to stick on my ceiling, the real ones. Silent, massive, patient. I sit there with his pocket watch in my hand, the one my grandmother gave me after he died. Inside the lid, there's a tiny photo of me at 10 standing beside a honeybee display, smiling like I already knew who I was. I keep that watch on my desk now. Morning light hits it just right. Some days when I'm stuck on a problem or watching a student have a breakthrough, I find myself holding it not for answers, but for connection. The kids we work with remind me of me. The ones who don't speak up in class, who scribbles in notebooks during lunch, who gets told they're too quiet or too strange. We give them space, tools, time. They do the rest. One girl this spring, Amaya, tracked frog migration patterns using only a phone camera and colored strings. Her data wasn't perfect, but her joy when she presented it made the entire room lean forward. I told her the same thing my grandfather once told me. You don't need permission to be curious. Sometimes when I'm alone in the greenhouse, I whisper the line he left me. Write the things they don't understand. One day, the world will. And now I finally believe that. Not just in theory, not as comfortable, but as the truth. Because I've seen what happens when a voice is heard after being buried for too long. I've watched a shy kid become a scientist. I've watched my sister become a mentor. I've watched myself become someone I never thought I had permission to be. Legacy isn't a monument. It's a map. A thread we follow when the world tries to erase us. A quiet promise tucked inside a leather notebook, or an old bench, or a field full of ideas not yet grown. That night on the bench, I looked up and whispered one last time. I hope you see this. I hope you know. I didn't just build a lab, Grandpa. I built a life. One full of questions and light, and kids who don't need to be louder to be heard. And in the breeze moving through the trees just right, I swear I heard him answer. Quiet, steady, certain. I always knew you would.